Okay, so who are you?
I am Deborah Buns, David Buns' wife, and the daughter of Janet and Bob Kendrick from Mount Carmel.
Okay, okay. Tell me about growing up in Mount Carmel.
Let's see here. My earliest memories were being on the sidewalk in front of my house, playing with, I think I was playing with sticks and ants. And my mom all of a sudden coming out on the porch and saying, Debbie, we have to go to a meeting. And that's when I found out for the very first time, I probably was 4, that we were going to start going to meetings twice a day.
Okay, so tell me about when the prophet Benjamin Roden stole your bicycle.
Well, I had a banana seat bicycle, so I must have been no more than 10 years old, probably younger. And my bike was parked by a peach tree in our front yard. And I think I was getting ready to step outside and ride my bike when I saw Ben Roden walking by. He looked at my bike and he stopped, and then he looked at it again. And then he came into our yard and he picked it up and he towed it away. And I was like, Mommy, took my bike.
And then what happened?
And my mom was like, "Don't worry, Dad will get it back for you." So this was in the afternoon because my father worked 3 to 11 at a hospital as a surgical tech, and as soon as he got home, my mom told him, I was already in bed, that what had happened to my bike. And so my father went down to the Roden house, and they had a big shed right beside their triple house. They had 3 houses put together. And he broke the lock and brought my bike home, and nothing was ever said or done about it.
Okay, so talk about working in the garden when you were little.
Well, apparently this goes back to when my brothers and sisters were young. So to give you just a small tidbit of background, my parents were Sabbath school, Sunday school teachers, and then Sabbath school teachers in the Adventist church. And they met Perry Jones, and he brought them in, and they moved to Mount Carmel before I was born. So I was born at Mount Carmel, and because of Mount Carmel, which we'll explain later. But the Rodens had a huge garden, and they used the children as child slave labor. And in fact, I worked in the garden for a while up until he died. I was 9. We had to go out every day during the summer and work in the Rodens garden before we were allowed to go and help our parents with our garden and our house chores. So we hoed, raked, weeded, planted, watered, and we had to water by hand. We didn't have hoses, so we had to carry buckets out. And they didn't let us use machines. So we actually had to break up the hard clay ground with hose, and then uh, everything was hand done, and it was not a very successful garden because of it.
Okay, so what happened when Benjamin Roden died? What do you remember about that?
You know, not a lot, but everything changed very dramatically. And I wish I had been a little bit older because I could tell you the defining changes as they went along. But I was 9 when he died, and his was the first dead body I had ever seen. And he had been sick for some time. He couldn't stay awake, he slept all the time. And it was not a surprise to anyone when he died. I remember that, and yet everybody acted shocked, and I didn't understand that. And it turns out that he said he was never going to die, so that's why everybody was so shocked. So they had to his wife scrambled to come up with a reason why he died. And I just remember the whole everybody on the property being stunned and confused and kind of lost for a while.
So tell us about Lois Roden and what you remember about her.
Okay, remember I was a little heathen child who didn't pay a lot of attention, so there's going to be no deep in-depth things like David does. That's why I have him around. He's the intellectual. Basically, she introduced the Trinity, and she was very, very much about the mother, and everything became about the mother. And the Holy Ghost, and she put out very extravagant tracts, but she was a calmer person than her husband, and she was kinder, and so life at Mount Carmel became kinder and more relaxed, and she was particularly kind to children. She took us out of the gardens and out of the fields, and she tried really hard to make sure that as much as she could, we had a childhood and some fun things. She used to she used to go out and buy sherbet and 7-Up and ice and Hawaiian Punch and all these things. And then Perry Jones would be in charge, and we'd have socials. And it was just little silly things, like sometimes we would just put on our socks and slide down the long, slick wooden hallway of the ad building until it burned down, sadly, when I was 15. But it was just a kinder place. And because she was very much about the mother, she tried to portray that in her actions.
So when was the very first time you ever saw Vernon Howell, aka David Koresh?
I was 12. Rachel and I were both 12. We were 5 months apart. I was 5 months older than she was. And we had just come out of the ad building from a meeting. That's where we were having the meetings at the time. We weren't having them in the church for whatever reason. And we were standing, there was a porch with a railing, and we were both leaning on the railing, standing there talking about what we were going to do for the rest of the day, because it was a holy day. So we had to wear dresses, and we weren't allowed to play outside. We weren't allowed to do a lot of things. We were allowed to walk, read the Bible, sing hymns, or play, at that time anyway, play Bible games. And I had a few Bible games, so we were deciding that we were going to go to my house and play Bible games, which we did. But while we were standing there, an old Nova went by, and the guy in it looked at us really hard, but he seemed to know where he was going, because he went down straight to Perry Jones's house, and his was more towards the back of the property. And that was surprising to us, because not very many people just drove onto Mount Carmel and knew where they were going.
Well, he was a stranger, right?
Yeah, especially on a holy day. He was a stranger. We'd never seen him before. We'd never heard of him. We didn't know anything. So we speculated for about 2 seconds, but we weren't really that interested. We were 12, and we went to my house, and we started playing a Bible board game. And we were sitting on the floor in my living room, and we got a call from Rachel's father. And he said, I have a man named Vernon Howell here, and he would like to meet you girls. And Rachel said, okay, we're coming. And she hung up the phone, and she told me, and I said, oh, good grief. I said, what grown man wants to meet 2 12-year-old girls? He's a creep. I decided that right away.
Now you're 12 years old. You're 12 years old thinking like this, which seems a little strange to me. You already know what a creep is.
An adult man does not want to meet 2 12-year-old girls.
Okay.
So, and Perry put in that he said, he thought you were pretty. And I thought, So we went down there.
So let me get this straight. Perry's the one who relays the information that a 22-year-old man thinks you're pretty.
Mm-hmm. Okay. He wanted to meet the 2 pretty girls in front of the ad building.
Okay.
So we go. And as we're going down there, we are laughing, because we have no idea he's going to change everything in the future.
In a couple
He's
of years,
just another loser coming onto Mount Carmel looking for something. He'll be there for 2 seconds. They'll
And
change
this had
things
happened
for him.
before,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. They'll change things for him. He'll get bored. He'll get disgusted. He'll leave. Blah blah. You know, that's how we looked at it. So we were just by 12. We were jaded.
Like a drifter that would come through.
Exactly. So we had drifters before, you know. So we went down there, and you know, Rachel had to be nicer because they were in her home, and this was her father. And I think I was polite, but I think I gave him a look, because as soon as I met him, he looked back at me like, what?
Okay, so I understand that Vernon tried to court you.
Yeah. he got this, he liked young girls, he always had. And he got this thing that
Are you still 12? Or
I was
13
13.
maybe? Okay, you're 13. Okay.
I was 13 at this point.
Still very young.
And he decided that he would try to court me, to woo me. I don't know what his end game was at that time. He probably didn't know.
Describe the style of courting that he's having to adhere to here.
Well, he goes to Perry, and Perry comes to my mother. So he tells Perry, I want to court Debbie. Perry goes to my mother and says, Vernon wants to come over and court Debbie. My mother's like, she's 13. But Perry's like, oh, it's harmless, Janet. And anyway, he basically bullies her into it. And my mom tells me this is happening. And I don't like Vernon. I just found him creepy. And there's a lot of reasons why we'll go into later. But so I tell my mom, look, he's supposed to come over for dinner. I'm like, feed us dinner before he gets here, okay? Then we'll just like serve popcorn and some fruit. Then I won't have to eat looking at him, you know? Ugh. So my mom did. We had our dinner. And when he came over, we pretended we did it. And we had popcorn and I think watermelon. It was summer. So he comes over and I'm sitting in there and I'm just like, and he's trying to talk to me and I just kept sitting there. And so then I looked at him and I just, yeah, like that. And he's like, he's getting desperate. He's trying. Finally, I'm like, I'm tired. And I get up at like 8:30 at night and go to my room and close the door. And I leave my mother to deal with him. And that happened a couple of times before he got the message, Debbie is not interested.
Okay, for a short time, Vernon actually lived next door to you. Tell us what you saw, what you heard.
Well, at the time, we had a string of houses that were all in a sickle shape.
In a
so
row.
they were in a row there. And my bedroom happened to line up with the window of the duplex right next to me. And he moved in there for a while. And this was when he was going, I say going through, because you never knew what Vernon
not,
was up
right?
to. You never knew if it was genuine,
Or
it was an act. And I'll tell you why I think this was an act. Or if it was a spur of the moment thing. I mean, he didn't even know. So this is when he got really, really thin. When he first came onto Mount Carmel, he was chunky. He wasn't fat, but he was chunky. And we found out he'd been living on carrot cakes and stuff like that. So he decided to go on a fast. And he would go right up to the window that was directly across from my window. And my window was always open. It was summer. It was hot. We didn't have air conditioning. So we relied on open windows and fans. And he knew this. So he would go in front of the window and he would prostrate. How do you say that?
prostrate?
Prostrate. It wouldn't come out of my mouth. I know that word, but... And he would put his arms up like this, and he would weave, and he would go, oh, God! And he would yell like this, and he'd say, please save this sinner, oh, please! And I'm not making fun of someone doing that. It's just that he was
what are you
putting
doing?
on such a big act, and he would cry and he would throw himself around, and he got Lois Roden very, very upset and concerned.
what did she
She
do?
was genuinely scared for him because he was getting thinner and thinner. He had a lot of issues with food, and quite frankly, I think he went through binging and starving on a regular basis. This was normal for him. He just had, I think he had a serious eating disorder, which is very sad. But I didn't realize that at the time, and I just thought he was crazy. And he got down to where he was just skin and bones, and she would come and beg him, Vernon, please eat. This happened in front of the window. I could see it. I could hear it. Please eat, Vernon. No, I can't. I'm a sinner. And he would start the whole thing. And she would give him vervain tea, which not very many people are familiar with, and you're lucky if you're not, because it's disgusting. But she would give him jugs and jugs of vervain tea, trying to heal him. And he did this every day, all day and night for months. I barely slept because he would be screaming and swaying in front of the window all night.
Okay, so tell me about your outing to Tyler, Texas with Lois Roden.
Well, one day, Lois Roden went around to Rachel and Michelle's parents, mine and Brenda's, that's my little sister, and Karen and Sherry Doyle's parent, grandma and dad, and invited us all on a trip to Tyler, Texas with her, just for fun. And Vernon was with us. He went with us, and we thought it was kind of strange, but we were excited at the same time because we didn't get to go very many places, especially with, I don't think we'd ever been on a trip with Lois Roden before. So we went to Tyler, Texas, and it was an A-frame farmhouse, and it was the cutest house. We walked inside, and she put the 6 of us girls up in a loft room, and it was like living in a little dollhouse. I mean, we went nuts.
And whose house was this?
This was Harriet's.
And who was she?
She was a friend of Vernon's.
Okay. And what did she do specifically in terms of the history of the branch?
She told Vernon about the branch. About
Lois
Lois Roden.
Okay.
Yes.
And she knew Lois Roden.
And she knew Lois Roden, and this is how we ended up visiting her. Now, I believe Lois Roden had been there before because she knew that this would be a place that us girls would have fun. And we did. I mean, besides the farmhouse, there was animals all over the place, and it was in a really beautiful country area. And we just had the best time. I was very young. I was, 12, maybe 13 at the time. So I don't have like clear memories of everything, but
well, this would have been before Vernon actually was saying he had a message or anything.
Yes, yeah. Yes. And Lois was very much Lois Roden, or Sister Roden, however, we had to call her Sister Roden, but Lois Roden was very much in charge at the time, and she was trying to mentor. I think that's the best way to put it. She was mentoring Vernon at the time. And she decided that she would really treat us girls while we were out. So we got to drive around and see Tyler. We had never seen Tyler before or since, but we got to see that, stay in that little loft. We got to see animals, and she also decided to take us out to a cafeteria, which cafeterias at that time were big in Texas. They're more just buffets. Let me tell you, buffets are not as good as cafeterias, but that at the time, that's what it was. Vernon was very scandalized by us all going out and paying for food and eating in a kitchen that might have meat. And Lois Roden explained to him that, hey, this has got a completely different kitchen. Libby's cafeteria has a completely different kitchen for vegetarians. So he calmed down a little bit, but then she also decided to take us out for ice cream. And that's when he kind of lost it. He really didn't like people having fun, and he also, in my opinion, from living with him, around him for over 5 years, and living, as him as the ruler for 5 years, he had an eating disorder. He had a really love-hate relationship with food. And so anytime anybody was enjoying their food, he was deeply disturbed by it. And then the fact that it had sugar in it, and on and on, he started going on and about how it was a sin. And he went, I don't remember everything he said, but finally Lois Roden looked at him and she said, "You need to relax, Vernon. Sometimes people just need to have fun and enjoy themselves." And I was just like, yeah. But yeah, that was we had so much fun, and despite Vernon being there.
Okay, so talk about when you had to chaperone Vernon and Rachel.
Well, after Vernon gave up on me, within a very short period of time, don't ask me how short, but I remember it was quite short, he decided to woo Rachel. And Rachel was into it. Rachel was lonely and wanted someone to love, and to love her and be hers. And he was very good at seeming like he would do that. So she decided that she would get guitar lessons from him. And I don't know why, but I got appointed their chaperone. I was not happy about it. I didn't get asked. I got appointed. So I would go to these, and I know David told you the story earlier about when I had to ride in the car with Vernon and Nicole. Well, this was kind of the same thing. Vernon and Rachel, let's remember, Rachel was all of 13 at this time. We were both still 13. And boy, that seems so young. At the time, we thought we were very old. But, she was 13, and he was paying attention to her, and he was charming to her and everything. And we would meet up for these guitar lessons, and they didn't really do much practicing on the guitar. It was more flirting and goo-goo. It was just very sickening. I mean, first of all, you don't want to be there for somebody else doing that, no matter who they are. But then because I didn't like Vernon...
But at this point, this is a 23-year-old man.
Yeah, he was 23, we were 13.
Yeah, so to get the context.
And he was sitting there flirting with a 13-year-old. Yeah. And something nobody seems to talk about, but for some reason it made a lasting impression on me. Whenever Vernon was sitting, he liked to cross his legs, take off his shoes, his socks if he had them on, and massage his own toes and rub his foot and then grasp it and rub it.
And dig the toe jam out.
Yeah, and dig his toe jam out. And he did this during these guitar lessons. And I was just like, and Rachel was just like, oh, Vernon. And I'm not making fun of Rachel for this because she was 13 years old, and it was him.
But we're making fun of him.
Yeah, we're making fun of him. I mean, she's just a poor 13-year-old girl who's had her father, throw her at this man. And then Vernon got bolder and bolder, and he realized he had two young girls there at his disposal with no one else around. Now, don't get me wrong, there was no
physical,
anything physical. But, it's just one of the things that predators, pedophiles...
Grooming.
They start to ask you, more and more pointed questions. And that's what he started doing with us, It was just like, I think the first thing he asked us was, one of the first things anyway was, well, have you two ever kissed each other?
Yeah.
No.
This is supposed to be a
I mean, we had never heard of this stuff.
This is a conservative
Yeah,
group.
you have to understand. We didn't know, Rachel and I didn't know anything beyond Mount Carmel at that point. We hadn't gone to very much schooling, and we didn't even know that gays existed. And I have, I mean, I find that so bizarre that I got to that age and didn't know, but I just didn't know. So we were just like shocked, like, what? Why? And it went from there, and it went into things like, oh, well, if you let a boy touch you, have you let a boy touch you? Where have let him touch you? And it just became really inappropriate questions, and it shocked Rachel. And I don't think either one of us ever answered any of his questions, but she forgave him for it, and I was just appalled.
Okay, so then at some point, Lois Roden lets him teach, and he has a message. What did you think about that?
Not much at first, but the thing that was really shocking about his message was how Lois Roden reacted. She at first fought him on talking and holding meetings, but she caved pretty quickly, and she had never done that before. She was the prophet, period. And the only time anybody else gave meetings was meetings when she was away.
Like
and
Clive.
They were, yeah, like Perry. Clive Doyle or Perry Jones, and they taught her message. And it came as quite a shock when all of a sudden we had Vernon in front of us talking. And that was different. And my parents talked about it, and that's when I truly understood how huge it was, because I listened to my parents, and my parents were like, yeah, something's going on here that, we have to pay attention, because she's endorsing his message, which means that it must be true, because the prophet wouldn't endorse his message if it wasn't. So everybody started from being annoyed with him, went from being annoyed and kind of laughing at him to paying very close, strict attention to what he had to say.
All right, so what happened when you heard about, you were told about Lois Roden and the affair with Vernon?
I heard that she came into a meeting waving a pregnancy test and that it was positive. And that was shocking, because that was the first time I had heard that her and Vernon had been intimate.
Right, but how were you told specifically? You weren't at the meeting.
Oh, no, I wasn't at the meeting. My mom told me. My mom was actually sent to tell me this by Vernon.
Right.
And I have no idea. I guess, I don't know. I can only speculate that he wanted me to be upset or jealous. I don't know.
Or not hear it from somebody else.
Huh?
Or not hear it from anybody else.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't know. But that's how I heard it.
Okay, so tell us about the really strange day when you were told about the affair with Lois Roden.
Well, everybody else found out in a meeting at Lois's house. But I was at home, and
very briefly, what did you hear happened in that meeting?
I heard that Lois Roden had brought had come in with a pregnancy test and flashed it around and said she was pregnant, and then she ripped the necklace off of Rachel's neck.
No. Let's start over. Okay, so then our last question is for today. How did you feel when you found out about Rachel and Vernon getting married?
I had mixed feelings about it. I mean, first of all, when I found out, it was in the strangest of circumstances. My mom and I had stopped to get gas in Belmead, Texas, and I had talked my mom into getting me a Dr. Pepper, which was forbidden. We walk out, and I have this Dr. Pepper, and I'm swigging it. And we look over, and Vernon's calling us. I don't know how I didn't get in trouble about that soda, but we got asked to come over to the van, and we knew Rachel was gone. We got told that Rachel had been taken, I think, to Colleen. Anyway, Rachel, we went to the van, and my mother and I stepped into the van, the back, and we sat down, and there was Rachel and Vernon. And Rachel was in a bed in the back of the van, and Vernon was sitting there, and he's like, so, she's got this big, goofy grin on her face. And he says, Rachel and I got married. And I'm going to be honest, I was stunned. I knew that he was wooing her, but I didn't realize that he was actually going to marry a 14-year-old girl. Just hadn't occurred to me yet. So I tried to play cool, and I said, oh, I'm not surprised. And inside I'm going, and he sits there, and then he proceeds to tell us the weirdest story. But then if you know Vernon, okay, he says, well, we were supposed to just go and be married in name only, but I woke up Rachel, and we had sex, and then she goes, and we're really married. And he went on to say some
TMI.
Yeah, TMI things, but that's how I found out.
Okay, so tell us about when you heard the Bunses were coming for Passover 84.
I was not excited. I was groaning. I was like, ugh. I did not have a good experience with the Bunses, and now I'm a Buns, but I didn't care for it wasn't the whole Buns family in general. I don't think I actually knew David existed at that point. I mean, I was young, but his sister was a snob, and she was cliquey, and her and Rachel cliqued whenever they were there, and they treated me like crap, and they would all go around together, and I'd be by myself. And when you're a young teenage girl, that's very upsetting. As an adult, you're like, okay, whatever. But so I wasn't looking forward to that. And then David's mother was very scandalous to me. I mean, she wore dresses up above her knee. She would sit down and be like, oh my gosh, I can see her knee. She wore makeup, and she just seemed to be very reserved and very like, I'm too good for these people. I don't know if she was trying to do that on purpose. Don't get me wrong. I mean, she's my mother-in-law, and we're fine. But at the time, from a child's perspective, she was so very different. That's what I thought. So I wasn't looking forward to it. But then we were in a meeting when they showed up, and they started filing in, and I was going, And then David walked in the door, and I was like, I thought he was the most beautiful boy I had ever seen, and that was it for me. I was like, oh, David. Of course, he didn't know that, and we were both very, very shy. He was used to girls being mean to him and not liking him, and I wasn't used to boys really liking me, so we were both too afraid to talk to each other. I always ask him, I was so Twitter-pated with you. Did you notice me? He goes, well, I noticed you, but I didn't think anything about it because I knew you wouldn't like me.